Okay, in this next step, let's take a look at some additional tools that we get with these request and response objects. I'm going to jump back to the resource pack, and I'll open up the fifth step, which is called Adding Request and Response Examples. Go ahead and copy the code and paste it over the code that's currently in your index.php file and save it. So just to show you what we had before, we had our autoload inclusion, we had our two use statements, we had our creation of the request object. If we scroll down past all these commented out examples, we see our input being set here, our response being created, and finally our response being sent. So everything else is just in comments, but let's take a look at how we access some of the different features of these two objects. So in this request create from globals, what it's saying is that we're grabbing all of the data from our global variables, like our URL and our query parameters. We're grabbing them from what was actually sent from the client, the values that we see inside of our $_get and $_post variables. But we can simulate a request by passing our own URL and parameters into the request object. So if we uncomment this out, and let's comment out our original one, what we would expect here is that the output would say, "Hello, Fabian." So let's jump to the browser and refresh. And sure enough, it says, "Hello, Fabian." So this is actually pretty powerful. You can set up a number of basic tests this way by setting up the URL to be a particular value. So now these next examples of what we can do with the request object print out something to the page. So I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom and comment out our response send, just so we can clearly see what's being printed out. This first one will show us the URI that's being requested minus any query parameters. So I'm going to uncomment this, and let's go to the browser and refresh. And you see it's index.php, though we're setting that value here. If we set this to index2 and saved it, and jump back to the browser, you'd see it now says index2.php. So again, this is just a sign of the kind of control we have over even the URL. I'm going to jump back to the editor here and switch this back to index.php. I'll comment this line back out. And in this one, we're retrieving get variables with the get method. And we've seen these both already. If we scroll down to the bottom, you see request get. So we're doing the same thing here in just a slightly different way. I'm going to uncomment this and jump back to the browser and refresh. And it says Fabian, which if we go back to our code is the name that we're setting in the parameter inside of our create method here. And I'm going to recomment that and uncomment out the next line. And this sets a default to universe. If we go to the browser and refresh, it should still say Fabian because inside of our code, I'm going to go back to the editor, we're setting the name to Fabian. But if we took the name out and saving, and then going back to the browser and refresh, we'll see our default value showing. Okay, I'm going to go back to the editor. I'll recomment out this line. And next, we're taking a look at how to grab a server variable. So I'll uncomment this out and save it and jump back to the browser and refresh. And we see localhost, which is our HTTP host. Okay, back to the editor. I'm going to recomment that out. Now, this next example we can't really demonstrate, but it shows how to access the files variables. It's using the same format as server or query. And same with the global cookies variable. We would do that the same way. We can also display headers that have been set. So if we're getting the host, I'm going to uncomment this out here and save it and jump back to the browser and refresh. You see localhost. And if we did the content type, I'm just uncommenting out this one line and clicking save. And jump back to the browser and refresh, you see that there's no content type actually set right now. Another thing we can take a look at is the method that's being used in order to display the page. And these are the options that you might see: get, post, put, delete, head. I'm going to uncomment this out, save it, and refresh. You see that this is a get. Now this particular bit might not make a ton of sense to you, like what does get, post, put, delete, head mean? But chances are you'll wrap your mind around this once you start looking at RESTful APIs. For the most part, we're only using get and post inside of typical websites. The other ones come into play when we start looking at APIs. Okay, I'm going to recomment that out and uncomment the next line where we get the languages that are supported by the client. I'm going to save this, go back to the browser and refresh. And we're doing a var dump here so we can see the full array, and you can see the languages that are supported. I'm going to go back to the editor. So there's just one more example here. We're not going to go through it in detail because we're not using a reverse proxy, but this is showing you one of the benefits of using the methods inside of the request class instead of rolling your own or accessing global variables. So one kind of security check that you might do is checking the IP address of your client with an IP address inside of your database. And most of the time this would work. But if you use a reverse proxy, and just in case you're not sure what a reverse proxy is, it's basically a cache of your site that serves static files instead of building your pages on the fly. If you understand how Drupal's cache system works, then you understand what a reverse proxy is. Those caches, though, tend to exist on servers that aren't your main server, which can mess up some of the server variables that you might use inside of your code for authentication. So one thing you can do with a reverse proxy is use server HTTPX forwarded for as well. But then you can also have chained proxies where one cache is being pulled from another cache and so on. And in that case, you're not going to be able to use this. But out of the box, the request class comes with a method called getClientIP, and that goes through this process of figuring out what the IP address actually is. So little use cases like this come up every so often, where you either have to roll something on your own and go down a rabbit hole of trying to understand a whole set of concepts that you might not be familiar with, or you can just use Symfony's methods that have been proven and that take care of these edge cases for you. So this is one of the arguments with using a framework instead of your own code, is that it hides these situations where you'd have to do a lot of learning to solve a very small problem, and instead makes all of that transparent to you.